Yet for a time, it seemed as if modern bankers had solved this age-old problem. They really thought they were smarter than the Medici. Memphis, Tennessee is a long way from Florence, and the world economy has come a long way since the Renaissance. A crucial part in that transformation has been played by the spread of modern banking from its Italian birthplace to a country where money has increasingly taken the form of easy credit. The United States has been built on borrowed money. But whereas the Medici tended to lend only to the relatively well-off, until the present credit crunch at least, American banks seemed willing to give just about anyone a loan. Memphis is famous for blue suede shoes, barbecued ribs, and bankruptcies. You can tell people here are a little, how shall I say this, a little subprime. You only need to look at the shopping mall for the seriously poor, and the ubiquitous no-frills eatery. Then there's a tax advisor who can tell you how to claim your low-income credits. A shop where you can borrow money on the equity you own in your car, and a place where they'll give you an advance on next week's paycheck. Not to mention a pawn shop the size of a department store.
And finally, when you've no possessions left to pawn or to sell, there's just one option left, and that's to head on down to ZLB Plasma, where you can sell your own blood for $25 a pop. Talk about being bled dry. It's amazing, really, an entire economic sector based on people who are broke.
In some ways, it rather reminds me of the East End of Glasgow. Yet there's a world of difference between this world and the world where loan sharks extract their pounds of flesh from petty defaulters. Here in subprime America, defaulting on your debts is easy. Well, pretty easy. This is Richie. He's in the repo business, snatching cars from under their owners' noses when they haven't made their payments.
And he grabbed that bolt action and went, and I watched the rifle shell go into the barrel. And he lunged it towards me and hit me right here and almost knocked me down. He said, either you drop the truck or I'm dropping you. And I said, yes, sir. And I dropped the truck.
You know, you make it sound so attractive. Maybe I should switch jobs.
I'll tell you what, it's interesting.
In the bankruptcy capital of America, repossessing cars is a routine matter.
$16,000 average book, gentlemen, with the ads on it now. It's got the ads, the wheels, the leather, the top.
Each week, United Auto Recoveries sells 500 repossessed cars. The cars are auctioned off to the trade, ending up in the same car lots to be sold to much the same people, and when they can't keep up with their monthly payments, repoed and recycled once again.
Technically, the Memphis repo men are simply doing what debt collectors do the world over. The difference, apart from the sheer mind-boggling scale of the thing, is the relative ease with which the bad debts are wound up and the collateral is sold off. For the debtors, there's virtually no social stigma, and nobody seems to be getting hurt. The big mystery is why the world's most successful capitalist economy is based on a foundation of more or less painless economic failure.
Here in Tennessee, when the house has been stripped bare and the repo man has taken your car, you end up in the hands of one of Memphis's bankruptcy lawyers. along with around 13,000 other people who filed for bankruptcy here in the past year.
Because that's what's one thing that's making your payments up so high.
Every week, bankrupts gather here with their lawyers to hammer out deals with their creditors. There's even a fast-track lane.
In this case, it's a mortgage, and it's a car or two cars. I can't see anything else in there that they're having to pay off.
Actually, there are 3 cars.
3 cars.
Yeah, third car is the neighborhood title loans has a lien on that car. They are holding the title.
So, putting this really simply, what were they supposed to be paying? And
that payment was reduced from $241.11 down to $107.
Okay.
Quite an improvement.
Cutting your monthly obligations by more than half.
From 1996 to 2006, there were between 1 and 2 million bankruptcy cases a year in the United States, nearly all of them involving individuals who elected to go bust rather than meet their obligations. In medieval Italy, or in the Glasgow of my youth for that matter, bankruptcy was seen as a disaster. But not here.
In fact, this ability to walk away unscathed from unsustainable debt and start all over again has been a defining characteristic of American capitalism. There were no debtors' prisons here in the early 1800s, at a time when English debtors could languish in jail for years. Since 1898, every American has been entitled to file for Chapter 7, liquidation, or Chapter 13, voluntary personal reorganization. For rich and poor alike, bankruptcy has become as much of an inalienable right as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The theory is that American law exists to encourage entrepreneurship, to facilitate the creation of new businesses. And that means giving people a break when things don't work out the first time or even the second time. The born risk-takers don't get wiped out as they learn through trial and error how to make that first million. Because today's bankrupt might be tomorrow's billionaire. It's a theory that seems to work. Many of America's greatest successes failed in their early endeavors, including the author Mark Twain, the comedian Buster Keaton, and none other than the great industrialist Henry Ford himself. All of these men eventually flourished, not least because they were given a chance to try, fail, and start over. For their part, the banks simply assume that a proportion of the loans they make will go bad. After all, most people going bankrupt owe relatively trivial sums. And Chapter 13 doesn't wipe their debts out. It just reschedules them. So it's a mistake to think, as Shakespeare's Antonio did, of moneylenders as mere leeches sucking the life's blood out of unfortunate debtors. Credit and debt are the building blocks of economic development, but it takes banks to elevate that relationship beyond the tie between a loan shark and his hapless victim.
It's only when borrowers like the ones on this Glasgow housing estate have access to efficient credit markets that they can escape the clutches of the Shylocks and the loan sharks. It's only when savers can put their money in dependable banks that it can be channeled from the idle to the industrious.
But wait, I hear you ask. If banks are the answer, how could so many have collapsed so spectacularly in the past year, throwing the financial world into turmoil? To understand why bad debts in places like Memphis could cause such chaos, you need to understand how the relationship between banks and borrowers broke down as loans came to be securitized. and sold on to unwary investors.
Once upon a time, being a banker was really rather boring. You lived by the 3-6-3 rule, which meant you paid 3% on deposits, collected 6% on loans, and were on the golf course by 3 o'clock. But in our time, banking became really rather too interesting. A whole series of financial innovations made it possible for common or garden loans to poor folks in places like Memphis to metamorphose into weird and wonderful things with names like collateralized debt obligations. Well, this financial alchemy, turning lead into gold or toxic waste into gilt-edged securities, was only possible because the ascent of banks was followed by the ascent of the second great pillar of the modern financial system, the bond market.
And for an explanation of how that came about, we'll turn to Mr. Bond himself.